alone on a distant world, until an alien mother and her child pleaded for shelter. The stars shone brighter than ever after the great battle. The Vorath threat had been pushed back, and for the first time in many years, John felt a deep sense of peace. The rebel station buzzed with quiet hope, as survivors repaired ships and shared stories of courage. John stood on the observation deck, looking out at the endless sky. Mira played nearby, laughing with other children from the resistance. Lyra watched her daughter with a soft smile, her eyes full of gratitude. Mark joined John, his face tired but hopeful. "We have won this battle, but the war is not over. The Vorath will return, and we must be ready." John nodded. "We've come a long way from that lonely shelter on the rocky planet. Now we have allies, family, and a reason to fight." Lyra approached them, her hand in John's. "Thank you for saving us, for giving us a home." John smiled gently. "You saved me too. I wasn't truly living until you came to my door." The glowing orb that had turned the tide was now safely stored in the station's vault. Scientists and engineers studied it, hoping to unlock more of its power for the future. Days turned into weeks. John trained new fighters, taught survival skills, and helped rebuild the resistance. Mira grew stronger and happier, her laughter filling the once dark corridors. One evening, as the station's lights dimmed, John stood alone, thinking about Earth. He pulled out an old photo, a picture of his family from long ago. He missed them, but he knew his path was here now. Suddenly, the station's communication panel beeped. A new message appeared, a signal from a distant colony under attack by the Vorath. John's eyes hardened with resolve. "We have to help them," he said. Mark nodded. "The fight goes on, but we are ready." Lyra hugged John tightly. "Together, we will protect the galaxy." As the rebel fleet prepared to launch, John looked at Mira playing nearby. The little girl had become the symbol of hope, proof that even in the darkest times, life finds a way. The lonely man was no longer alone. He was a leader, a protector, and part of something greater than himself. With courage and hope, John stepped into the future, ready to face whatever the stars held next. The alarm blared loudly across the resistance station. Red lights flashed, painting the cold metal walls with an urgent glow. John's heart pounded. The Vorath fleet was arriving. Everyone rushed to their battle stations. The once calm space station transformed into a hive of activity. Pilots checked their ships. Engineers ran diagnostics, and soldiers armed themselves for the fight ahead. John stood beside the glowing orb, feeling its strange energy pulse beneath his hands. This weapon could turn the tide, but only if they survived long enough to use it. Mark came up beside him. "We've fought many battles, but this one will decide the future." Lyra held Mira close, whispering comfort to the little girl who was scared but brave. The station's communications officer spoke through the loudspeaker. "Vorath fleet detected. They are closing fast. All units prepare for defense." John climbed into the pilot seat of a small fighter ship. His hands shook slightly, but his mind was clear. He glanced at the orb safely secured in the cargo hold, his hope for victory. Outside, the vast darkness of space filled with glowing ships, Vorath warships, massive and terrifying. Their red eyes blinked like stars of death. The battle began. With a roar, explosions lit the void as lasers and missiles flew in every direction. John maneuvered his fighter through the chaos, dodging blasts and returning fire. Behind him, the station's defenses held strong, but the Vorath were relentless. Suddenly, a warning flashed on John's control panel. His shields were failing. A large enemy fighter locked on. Evasive maneuvers. John shouted, twisting his ship just in time to avoid a deadly shot. He fired back, hitting the enemy's engine. The ship exploded in a bright fireball. As the battle raged, John's thoughts turned to the orb. The resistance leader had a plan. The orb would power a giant weapon on the station, a Weapon capable of destroying the Vorith mothership, but to activate it, someone had to bring the orb to the weapons chamber, and it would mean facing the worst dangers alone. John volunteered without hesitation. Lyra grabbed his arm. "Be careful." "I will," he promised. The path to the weapon chamber was through dark corridors filled with Vorith soldiers. John moved quickly and quietly, using every skill he had learned. Suddenly, a squad of Vorith blocked his way. John raised his pistol and fired. The fight was brutal, but he managed to push through, his heart racing. Finally, he reached the chamber. The giant weapon stood tall, waiting. John placed the orb into its core. The machine hummed and glowed, growing brighter and brighter. Outside, the battle paused. The Vorith ship seemed to hesitate. Then, with a powerful blast, the weapon fired a beam of energy that cut through the darkness, striking the Vorith mothership. Massive ship shuddered, then exploded in a brilliant burst of light. The remaining Vorith ships fled, broken and defeated. Cheers echoed through the station. John smiled, relief flooding him. Lyra and Mira ran to him, tears of joy in their eyes. "You did it," Lyra said. John shook his head. "We did it. Together." But as the stars returned to calm, John knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was wide, and many battles still awaited. For now, though, hope had won. The rebel ship soared through the starry sky, its engines humming softly. Inside, John watched the glowing orb carefully. It pulsed with power like a heartbeat from another world. This weapon was their only hope against the Vorith. Lyra held Mira close, her eyes tired but filled with determination. Mark and Kaya worked at the controls, scanning for signs of danger. The small ship wasn't fast, and they had no idea where to go next. "We need to find the resistance fleet," Mark sighed. "They're hidden in the nearby asteroid belt. If we can join them, we'll have a chance." John nodded. "The Vorith won't stop until they find us. We have to be ready." As the ship moved closer to the asteroid belt, the crew's tension grew. The dark space was full of floating rocks and debris, perfect places for enemies to hide. Suddenly, a warning beep sounded. "Incoming ships!" Kaya shouted. On the radar, several small Vorith fighters were closing in fast. John gripped the controls. "Prepare for battle." The rebel ship shook as the fighters fired bright energy blasts. John dodged quickly, weaving through the rocks. The ship's shields flickered under attack. Mark fired back with the ship's laser cannons. One enemy fighter exploded in a burst of light, but more kept coming. Lyra held Myra tightly. "Stay calm," she whispered. The little girl's eyes were wide with fear. John's hands were steady. "We can't let them catch us." After a tense chase, the Vorith fighters gave up and disappeared into the darkness. The rebel ship drifted toward a hidden space station inside a large asteroid. The station was old but guarded. A group of humans and aliens greeted them with cautious hope. John stepped off the ship, feeling the weight of responsibility. "We have the weapon," he told the resistance leader. "But we need help to use it." The leader, a tall woman with a mechanical arm, nodded. "The Vorith have taken many worlds. We fight for freedom. Your arrival gives us new hope." John explained the story, the lonely years, the alien widow and her daughter, the ancient weapon, and the dangerous journey. The resistance listened carefully. Kaya added, "The Vorith are stronger than ever. If we don't act soon, no one will be safe." The leader smiled grimly. "Then we fight together." Training began immediately. John learned how to use the advanced weapons and technology of the resistance. Lyra helped with medical supplies and caring for Mira. John looked at the glowing orb every day. It was powerful but fragile. They had to protect it at all costs. One night, as John stood outside the station looking at the stars, Lyra came beside him. "Do you think we can win?" she asked softly. John took a deep breath. "I don't know. But I do know one thing, we won't stop trying. Behind them, the station's alarms suddenly blared. Red lights flashed. Vorith ships approaching, Kaya shouted. John's heart raced. The final battle was near. The alarm blared loudly, echoing through the dark tunnels of the rebel base. John's heart pounded as he held the glowing orb, the ancient weapon that could change everything. The blue light pulsed softly, like it was alive. Kaya shouted, Vorith, reinforcements are coming. We have to move now. John nodded, gripping the orb tightly. Lyra gathered little Mira in her arms, holding her close. The narrow tunnels felt tighter as they hurried through, the sound of heavy footsteps and growls. Growing louder behind them, they reached a fork in the path. Kaya pulled out the old map. This way, she said, pointing to a smaller hidden tunnel. It's dangerous, but it leads outside through the cliffs. John took the lead, shining his flashlight into the darkness. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made him jump. The weight of the orb was heavy in his backpack, but heavier was the feeling that if they failed, all hope would be lost. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from behind. A group of Vorith hunters appeared, blocking their way. The creatures snarled, eyes glowing bright red in the dark. John raised the energy pistol Mark had given him and fired. The blasts glowed bright, hitting the creatures. One fell, but more charged forward. Lyra shouted, Run! They sprinted down the narrow tunnel, dodging falling rocks and sharp edges. Mira cried softly, scared but trusting her protectors. A sudden roar shook the tunnel, a collapse. Rocks tumbled down, blocking the path behind them. The Vorith were trapped, but so were they. John looked at the blocked exit. We need another way. Kaya pointed to a small ventilation shaft. It's tight, but it leads to the surface. One by one, they squeezed through the narrow opening. John went last, pushing rocks aside to make room. His muscles ached, but he refused to give up. Outside, the night sky greeted them with cold stars. The cliffside was steep and rocky. John helped Lyra and Mira down carefully. Almost there, he said. Suddenly, a bright light flashed in the distance. Vorith ships were landing nearby. We don't have much time, Kaya said. We need to get to the old rebel ship hidden in the valley. John led the way, moving fast but careful. The alien landscape stretched before them, dark mountains, glowing plants, and the distant hum of machines. As they ran, John thought of Earth, of the life he once had, now so far away. But here, in this strange place, a new family had formed. He would protect them no matter what. The group reached the valley just as the Vorith forces closed in. John spotted the rebel ship, a small, battered craft half hidden in tall grass. Mark was already there, starting the engines. Get on board. We fly or we die. They climbed inside, heartbeats racing. The ship's controls were old but functional. John helped Lyra and Mira into seats, then took the pilot's spot. With a roar, the ship lifted off, shaking as it escaped the Vorith's grasp. Outside, the Vorith hunters watched helplessly as their prey escaped. John looked at the glowing orb. This weapon could save many lives, he said. But first, we need allies. Lyra nodded, holding Mira close. Together, we can fight. As the ship sped toward the unknown, John felt hope for the first time in years. The lonely man was no longer alone. His fight had just begun. Inside the rebel base, the air was cool and still, a sharp contrast to the dangerous world outside. John looked around carefully. The walls were covered with faded posters and strange symbols, reminders of a long fight against the Vorith. Broken machines and old weapons lay scattered, waiting for someone to use them again. Mark moved quickly, checking the base's systems. This place was once a stronghold for freedom fighters, he said. They fought the Vorith for years. But the war was lost. Most of them died or went into hiding. Lyra held Mira close. Is it safe here? She asked quietly. For now, John replied. But we can't stay long. The Voroth will find us if we're careless. Mark found a control room with blinking lights and old monitors. He tried to restart the systems. Suddenly, the screens flickered, showing star maps, communication signals, and nearby planets. John's eyes widened. We can contact Earth from here? Mark nodded. Maybe. The base has an old but powerful transmitter. If we fix it, we can send a distress signal. Lyra smiled faintly. Help is possible. But then a soft beep interrupted them, a warning. Mark's face grew serious. Someone is nearby. John moved toward the door, rifle ready. Outside, shadows flickered. They heard footsteps slow and careful. Friends or enemies? Lyra whispered, clutching Mira. John's finger tensed on the trigger. The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. It was a young woman, wearing a patchy uniform and carrying a small weapon. She looked at them with tired eyes. I'm Kaya, she said. I'm one of the rebels. You're safe here. But not for long. John lowered his rifle slowly. We need your help. Kaya nodded. The Voroth control this system now. They have soldiers everywhere. If we want to fight back, we must find the ancient weapon hidden deep in the caves beneath the base. Weapon? Lyra asked, hope rising. Yes, Kaya said. A powerful device that can destroy Voroth ships. But it's protected by traps and puzzles. Only those brave enough can get to it. John felt a thrill of excitement and fear. This could be their only chance to stop the Voroth. We must find it, he said. For Mera's future. The group prepared for the journey underground. Kaya handed them old maps and tools. The tunnels were dark and cold, filled with echoes and strange noises. As they walked deeper, John noticed strange markings on the walls, warnings left by the rebels long ago. The air grew heavy, and the silence was broken only by their footsteps. Suddenly, the ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. John stopped. An earthquake? Kaya shook her head. No, something else. Ahead, a deep growl echoed. The Voroth were not far behind. They quickened their pace, reaching a massive metal door covered in ancient symbols. John and Kaya worked together to solve the puzzle locking the door. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, with a loud click, the door opened. Inside was a chamber glowing with blue light. At the center stood the ancient weapon, a strange, glowing orb surrounded by alien technology. John reached out, feeling the power hum through his fingers. But before they could celebrate, a loud alarm blared through the tunnels. The Voroth know we are here. Kaya shouted. John looked at Lyra and Mira. We must hurry. Take the weapon and get out. The fight for survival was far from over. But now, hope was in their hands. John's heart pounded as he listened to Mark's words. After all these years alone, finally, someone had come to help. But the danger was closer than ever. The Voroth were not just scouts anymore. They were sending their full force. We need to move fast, Mark said, checking his high-tech gear. This shelter won't hold for long. If we stay, we'll be overrun. Lyra held Mira close. The little girl looked up with wide eyes, trusting these strangers but still afraid. John nodded. Where do we go? Mark pulled out a map from a small device. There's an old rebel base about 50 miles east. It's hidden in a canyon, safe from the Voroth sensors. If we can reach it, we'll find more survivors and better weapons. John looked at the rocky, barren land outside. The journey would be tough. No roads, no vehicles, just rough terrain and danger at every step. But staying meant certain death. We leave tonight, John said, his voice firm. We can't wait. The group quickly packed what little supplies they had. Mark handed John a small energy pistol, explaining how it worked. Lyra packed a small bag with Myra's essentials and wrapped the girl in a warm blanket. Before leaving, John checked the shelter one last time. It had been his home for years, his only safe place. Now it felt like a trap. As darkness fell, the three humans stepped. Outside, the air was cold and heavy. The stars above shone like silent watchers, but John couldn't think of them as friends anymore. They were just distant lights in a cold universe. Mark led the way, moving carefully and scanning for signs of the Voroth. John and Lyra followed. Closely, Mira sleeping safely in her mother's arms. For hours, they walked through the rocky valleys. Every sound made them jump, a distant growl, a rustling in the bushes, the sharp cry of an alien bird. The planet was alive with danger. Suddenly, Mark stopped. "Listen," he whispered. They heard low rumbling more than animals. The ground vibrated slightly. John's blood ran cold. The Voroth were nearby. "Hide," Mark ordered. They slipped behind a large boulder just as a group of Voroth hunters passed by. The creatures moved silently, their glowing eyes scanning for signs of life. One stopped, sniffed the air, and growled low, but after a tense moment, the group moved on. John exhaled slowly. That was close. Lyra squeezed his arm. "We can't stop now. Mira needs safety." The journey continued, harder with every step. Mira woke up, crying softly. John tried to comfort her, telling her stories of earth tales of green forests and blue oceans. For a moment, the girl smiled, but then, without warning, a sudden explosion shook the ground nearby. Dust and rocks flew into the air. Mark shouted, "Voroth attack, move!" They ran toward the canyon Mark had shown on the map. The path was steep and dangerous, but it was their only chance. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The Voroth hunters were closing in fast. John's legs burned with exhaustion, but he did not stop. Lyra ran beside him, her face determined. Despite fear. As they reached the edge of the canyon, Mark pointed to a narrow entrance hidden by rocks and shadows. "This way." They slipped inside just as the first Voroth appeared at the canyon's mouth. The creatures snarled, but could not follow them into the tight space. Inside, the air was cool and damp. Strange plants glowed faintly on the walls. John could see old signs of life tools, abandoned shelters, and symbols of a lost rebellion. Mark smiled for the first time in days. "We're safe, for now." John looked at Lyra and Mira. They were alive. That was all that mattered. But as the echo of the Voroth's growls faded outside, John knew their fight was far from over. In this hidden rebel base, new dangers and mysteries waited. And the lonely man's story was only beginning. The morning sun was weak as it rose over the rocky planet, but John could feel its warmth like a small promise of hope. Still, the danger outside was real. Fresh footprints of the Voroth circled the shelter like a hunting pack. The creatures had not left. They were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. John stood guard by the entrance, his rifle ready. Lyra sat close to little Mira, who held tightly to her mother's hand. The girl was quiet but curious, her blue eyes watching every move John made. Suddenly, a loud crashing noise broke the silence. Rocks tumbled down a nearby hill, and a group of Voroth scouts appeared. They were fast and fierce alien creatures, with sharp claws and glowing eyes. Their growl sent chills down John's spine. John fired his rifle, aiming carefully. One scout fell, but others charged faster than he could reload. Lyra grabbed a metal pipe and swung it with surprising strength, knocking one scout away. Mira screamed but stayed close to her mother. John shouted, "Get inside!" Now, as more scouts closed in, Lyra pulled Mira toward the shelter, but one scout jumped forward and nearly caught Mira's small arm. John fired just in time, driving the creature back. Inside, they locked the heavy door and sealed the windows. The shelter shook as the Voroth pounded on the walls. The air was thick with tension and fear. John checked their supplies. They were running low on food and water. If the attack lasted longer, they might not survive. Lyra's eyes met John's. "We must find a way out," she whispered. John nodded. "Tonight we'll try to escape. But first we need to rest and plan." The hours passed slowly. Mira finally fell asleep, exhausted from the fear and chaos. Lyra sat silently, staring at the small doll in her hands. John paced, thinking hard. The Voroth were strong, but they had one weakness: they hated fire. John pulled out an old flare gun from his supplies. "If we can make enough fire and noise, maybe we can scare them off long enough to escape," he said. Lyra nodded, hope flickering. In her eyes, "I will help for Mira." As night fell, the shelter grew cold and dark. The pounding on the walls began again, louder and more furious. Suddenly, the door shook violently as a huge Voroth brute slammed into it. John and Lyra grabbed their weapons, ready for the worst. But then, from the shadows outside, a strange sound echoed like metal scraping against rock. John's heart skipped. A beat. It was not the Voroth. A figure stepped into the dim light. It was another human wearing a high-tech suit, with a helmet hiding his face. He held a weapon that looked far more advanced than John's old rifle. "John," the stranger said softly, "I've been looking for you." John lowered his rifle, surprised but wary. "Who are you? How did you find me?" The stranger took off his helmet, revealing a face lined with scars and years of hardship. "My name is Mark. I was part of the rescue team sent to find survivors. We lost contact years ago, but I never stopped searching." Lyra looked at Mark. Hope and fear mixed in her eyes. "Can you help us?" Mark nodded. "I can, but we don't have much time. The Voroth are closing in, and they brought reinforcements." John felt a rush of relief and fear. Help had arrived, but the real battle was just beginning. John watched as the alien woman and the little girl settled into his small shelter. The woman, who introduced herself slowly as Lyra, spoke in broken words, but her eyes told a story filled with pain. The girl, quiet and shy, hid behind her mother's legs, clutching a small, worn doll. John offered them water and food, things he had saved carefully for himself. But Lyra accepted gratefully, and the little girl smiled faintly for the first time. For a moment, the lonely man felt warmth he hadn't felt in years. That night, as they sat near the dim fire, Lyra began to explain, her voice soft but urgent. Their planet had been attacked, not by humans, but by a powerful alien force known only as the Voroth. These creatures were cruel and relentless. Lyra's husband had been killed defending their home. She and her daughter had escaped on a damaged ship, searching for safety. John listened carefully. He understood danger. He had survived accidents and hostile creatures before. But the fear in Lyra's voice was something new, something deeper. She warned that the Voroth could track them. If they found Lyra and her daughter here, it would mean death for all of them. John's mind raced. He was alone for so long, but now his life was tied to these strangers. Helping them meant risking his own safety. Yet, leaving them to face the Voroth alone was impossible. Suddenly, the radio crackled again. The same faint voice, but this time the signal was closer too. Close. John's heart pounded. The Voroth hunters might already be nearby. He moved to the window, peering into the dark landscape. For a moment, he thought he saw shadows moving between the rocks. He told Lyra to stay quiet and hid the little girl behind a stack of supplies. John grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, scanning the horizon. The cold wind whispered warnings through the trees. The planet that had been silent for so long now felt alive with danger. Suddenly, a loud roar shattered the quiet. John turned just in time to see a large Voroth scout, a terrifying alien beast with glowing red eyes, charging toward the shelter. John fired his rifle, the blasts echoing through the night. The creature staggered but did not fall. It growled and lunged again. John ran back inside, closing the heavy metal door just before the creature smashed into it. The shelter shook from the impact. Lyra and the little girl screamed, but John quickly calmed them. "We must prepare," he said, his voice steady despite the fear inside. He and Lyra worked together to reinforce the shelter's defenses. Using old technology and whatever materials they had, they built traps and alarms. John taught Lyra how to use the rifle, and she listened carefully, determined to protect her daughter. Despite the danger outside, a small bond grew between them. John shared stories of Earth, and Lyra told more about her home world, a place filled with strange plants and blue skies. The little girl, whose name was Mira, began to smile more, her fear slowly fading, but the night was far from over. The Voroth were hunting, and John knew this was only the beginning. If they survived the coming days, it would be because they trusted each other. As dawn broke, the first light revealed fresh tracks around the shelter, signs that more Voroth were close. John's lonely world had changed forever. Now he was a protector, a guardian for two fragile lives in a dangerous galaxy, and the real test was just beginning. For many years, John had lived alone on a small rocky planet far from Earth. The stars above were the only company he had. The planet was quiet, too quiet. The silence wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, making his days feel longer and his nights colder. He had no friends, no family, and no one to talk to. Just him, the endless empty land, and his memories of Earth. John had not always been alone. Once, he was part of a big space mission, sent to explore new worlds. But a terrible accident had separated him from his crew. They never came back to find him. So he made a new life by himself, building a small shelter from metal scraps, growing a tiny garden inside a dome, and hunting small alien animals to survive. His only purpose now was to stay alive, day by day. Despite the loneliness, John had learned to be strong. He fixed machines, kept his shelter warm, and even taught himself new languages by reading old digital books left from previous explorers. Still, every evening when the twin moons rose, he looked out at the empty horizon and wondered if anyone else was out there. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, was there someone who could hear his silent calls for company? One cold night, as John sat by a small fire, his shelter's radio suddenly crackled with a strange sound. It was faint but clear, a signal. John froze. He had thought he was the only living thing on this planet. Carefully, he adjusted the radio's frequency. The signal repeated, a soft voice, calling for help in a language he barely understood. His heart raced. Was it a trap? Or a chance to end his loneliness? The next morning, John prepared to investigate. He grabbed his old hunting rifle, a backpack with supplies, and stepped outside into the harsh sunlight. The dusty wind blew against his face as he followed the signal's direction. Hours passed as he climbed rocky hills and crossed dry valleys. Then, just when he was about to give up, he saw movement near a cluster of strange, twisted trees. There, standing alone in the dusty clearing, was a woman and a small girl. They looked weak and scared. Their clothes were torn, and their skin had a faint blue glow, unlike any creature John had ever seen. The woman's eyes met his, full of fear but also hope. The little girl clung to her side, her wide eyes filled with silent questions. John raised his hand slowly, trying not to scare them. The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke words John barely understood. But the meaning was clear. "Help us. Please." For the first time in years, John felt something stir inside him, a mix of fear, curiosity, and a deep desire to help. He didn't know who these strangers were or what dangers they faced, but he knew one thing. His lonely life was about to change forever. As he led them back to his shelter, John couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was no accident. Something bigger was happening. Something that would test him in ways he had never imagined. The stars above twinkled silently, watching as a new story began, one of trust, survival, and the fragile hope of friendship in the vast emptiness of space.